got imports. We've got all of this today on Sales Chat. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Sorry about my dog scratching on his bed in the background there. We're going to get to that in just a minute. The geographicality of where I am and the dog and everything is coming in. And today we've got the Diener and Chad with us on the Logistics Life. Did I say Sales Chatter in the intro? I think I did.
I didn't hear it.
You didn't hear it? Okay. Well, it's the Logistics Life, y'all. Used to be Sales Chatter. Gentlemen, how are we doing today? There's my dog with the squeakers.
I'm too busy watching the animation and the intro. We can tell how we're going to follow this.
It's just one of those things. I tend to. I'm like kind of like this Energizer bunny lately, guys. It's crazy when you get reinvigorated for what you love. And I'm starting to read 5, 6, 7, 8 articles a day. I'm really starting to catch up. I'm involved with a company that is just spectacular. The people are spectacular, and the growth and the desires and the vision is just cool. So everything about it's lighting up, man. I got a roast in the oven with potatoes. We're all good, man. It's good. Like, how could you ask for anything else?
Yeah. Hey, Dan, have you discovered Google's new product, Notebook LM?
LM, yes.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing, Chad. Brother, I'm already trying to figure out how to use my voice instead of the two people's, because what it does right now, like a simple URL, mind-blowing. Yeah. And I'm telling you, it's going to get more and more and more. I was having a conversation with somebody on the weekend, and this will lead right into the automation conversation with the ILA. But on the weekend, I was having a conversation with somebody, and he said, Dan, I honestly think it's to the point where you can't trust video. And I'm like, it's pretty damn close. I mean, you got to second guess. Yeah. I think, I don't know if you've seen some of the new stuff that's out where it's like AI video generation, and it's starting to become, I put it more like video games where, there's some pieces of like Call of Duty, you're like, man, that looks like an actual movie.
Right.
Yes. But then, I don't know if you heard the latest from Hollywood, the actors are coming in saying, okay, we're going to start renting ourselves. So like, they won't even need to act in a couple of years. They're literally just, you're going to be able to rent Brad Pitt for a commercial for X amount of money. And it's like, man, talk about instant gratification, right? Like,
yeah, it has real potential to completely transform the entertainment industry.
Yeah. And so, and here's the thing, guys, and I guess let's dive right into it, because I think it's important, right? We probably all, I know, Dean, you sent it to me, and I was talking to a lot of people about it, about the 77% or 79% increase in wages over the next X time. Somebody making 150 now is going to be making 275, 285. But I think one of the bigger conversations is the automation. Meaning for us, maybe not necessarily in the strike, but I started looking into what we were talking about last week, and that was the fact that we are, North America, we're the bottom rung of all ports for productivity. And I really started thinking and started to listening to a bunch of people and started diving deep into the AI and automation space. And, like anything, if you remember, or if you've read any stuff, remember, Dan, this is asinine when you hear what I'm about to say. If you've read any stories, like when Henry Ford made the first car, it was like, it's a demon. It's going to lose. We're going to lose all our jobs. The people that do the horses' hooves and everything. And it was like this huge, everybody's going to die. The world's blowing up, and people just reallocate. They retooled, we saw it during COVID.
Yeah, there's this concept in economics, right, called creative destruction, right? You have new innovation, and it does cause some destruction of how things used to be done. But there's a net win benefit out of it in the end.
Yeah. What's your thoughts there, Dean? So, I want you guys to dive in. I'm done talking. I've kind of set it up for you guys. You guys got to knock the pins down now. So, what's the latest you're hearing?
Well, I was just distracted by something my boss sent me about the ILA boss, the guy that's, this is on Twitter, so it must be true.
Yeah.
Harold Daggett, who pledged to cripple the United States, owned a 76-foot yacht, a Bentley, and gets paid over $900,000 a year. Also acquitted on RICO charges. So the DOJ has been trying to talk to him, but we're talking about, I think, on one end of the scale, people that make a lot of money on the dock, and there's a whole nother raft of people who are entry-level dock workers who don't make as much. So I think there's probably some nuance to the wage piece on top of the automation piece. I get that. I mean, I'm as against autonomous trucks as anybody, because I just don't see how you take a driver out of the truck, but just even if they did, why like what's the impact on families? Like taking drivers out of the trucks for automation sounds good in theory. How does it play out in reality? And we're talking about Notebook LM and Chat GPT and these technologies that just have the smell of putting people out of work about them. I don't know. I guess I'm far enough into my career that I could see technology replacing me one day.
Dean, what do you think about that middle mile, that long haul scenario where maybe the truck starts to take over a little bit and the driver can rest?
Yeah, I would love that, Chad. I would love a middle mile piece where it reset my 14-hour clock and allowed me to do just like that Mercedes-Benz video on the internet that's doing the rounds, where the driver's in the bunk sleeping. Because that's the first thing I would do is have a nap. If the technology's that good to drive itself, I'm going to bed.
Yeah.
And if it's in the middle of nowhere and it's an hour and a half or something like that, I think that has real power.
And then the return on your investment starts to grow as a driver, right? Because now you're able to utilize that equipment for more hours in the day. Yeah.
I think driver assistance technology, that piece has enormous value. I just don't, having done 2 million miles as a driver, the amount of stuff that goes wrong on a good day, you take a driver out of the scenario, and then you add into it all of the complexities that are involved with other people driving on the roads. I don't know how you deal with that if you don't have a driver.
So I think in order for, and just my 2 cents, guys, in order for trucks to truly become autonomous, everything needs to be autonomous. I think for vehicles to truly become autonomous, everything needs to be autonomous. And I think we're a long way away from that. I think, we're going to have the ability, like they've already done in California. Budweiser's done it. It was documented 4 years ago, I think, even where they took an electric vehicle and it drove itself from one distribution center to the other. And it was a very simple move. But you're right, Dean, when you're talking about everything happening around us, construction and what happens in gravel and all these other elements. And most importantly, people. Then motorcycles, then, all these other elements, the computers need to talk to each other. And I think right now they're processing 800 gigabits a second or something. A lot of these vehicles, I mean, that's a lot of information transfer. But if they're not talking to each other, something's going to happen. And there's even a bigger part of that, which is a legal aspect, right? Like I remember speaking to an OPP officer, I'm going to say 3 years ago at the Toronto Car Show. OPP had a Tesla Model X, the SUV with the gull wing doors, right? And it was all decked out like an OPP car. And I said, do you guys drive? They says, no, somebody, they donated it for us to use at the show. I said, I said, let me ask you this. How do you guys determine, like with vehicles that drive themselves? And I think it was probably even longer than that, because it was just after that Tesla in New York went right under the truck. And the driver got killed because I guess the truck blended in with the background of the sky, or there was I forget the whole logistics of it. But I remember him saying, he says, well, the first thing we do now is we plug the car in. And and that's right now, obviously. And if there's no brakes, that means the driver was careless driving. So they're at fault. Like even if the car drives itself, and having a vehicle that has the adaptive cruise control and the lane assist that pretty much drives itself except turns corners. When your foot's not on that brake, it's scary as hell because you're thinking this truck ain't stopping, it's not stopping. And you end up, but
I didn't mean to drag us down this.
No. But Dean, it's a good one, because I think the ports are easier. And this is where I'm going with it, is I think the ports are easier to add autonomy and autonomous movement in the ports.
Yeah, it seems that way. Yeah.
Right? Like you got to think also, right? Electric vehicles, right? How big does a battery have to be to give a truck, a tractor trailer, enough juice to get anywhere that's actually going to be profitable, right? What is the juice limit? Because I know people still have range anxiety with like 450 miles.
Yeah.
You know, where am I going to charge? What am I going to do if I have to go down for 4 hours to charge because the battery is so big? So I think there's a lot of technology that needs to come. Not to mention, I think our roads almost need to be electrified, meaning as you drive, it will charge for it to really take hold. But when you're talking about the ports, Asia's already did it. They're one of they're the most productive port on the planet. It would be interesting. I don't know if any of you guys have the data, but to get the data when they actually automated the port, how many jobs were lost? How many jobs were created? Like there's that variable, right?
Yeah, there should be some knock-on benefits. Different types of jobs get created, right? And technology and maybe engineering types of jobs. Yeah, I'm not sure of all those implications. We certainly don't have the data on that, do we, Dean?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No. So let's talk about the strike then, guys. You know, we've heard reports, you know, $1 billion a day, $5 billion a day, every one day. Dean, you and I were talking, it was about 6 days. I saw a report 2 days ago where they're estimating 8 days. Another report says 5. Can you guys kind of break down the gist of what we can expect to happen or what you guys see as happening?
And read the tea leaves, Dean.
Yeah, so I talked to some people today that really know what's going on. They're in this business, so they know people. Like they know a guy. Literally, they know a guy that they can call. And one of them said this will be a 3-week event. And I thought, wow, that's crippling territory because
that's significant.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the challenge, Dan. The government doesn't want to enforce Taft-Hartley, right, and take away the powers of the union. They want enterprise bargaining. If they force them back to work, then the union just goes slow. And as he said last night in his video, instead of 30 lifts an hour, we'll do 5. So we'll slow things down and cripple things anyway. Yep. So really the government's in a no-win position where it has to be through good faith bargaining. And the union's been very blunt. They've done exactly what they said they were going to do, even as far as a year ago. So they're out on strike. They've got sympathy from the Teamster union. It hasn't spread to other ports, other coasts yet, but there's probably an inevitability about that. So here we are, and the experts here today, this is the Inland Conference for the Journal of Commerce. There's a lot of people in that multimodal space. So we probably have enough inventory in the works moving because people have been pulling containers off wharves already most of last week in bigger numbers. We've probably got enough for a week to 10 days before things start to become really diabolical. Now, having said that, this same guy I was talking to, one of his big customers, and they're big in drayage, one of his big customers is already out of electrical components needed to rewire houses that have been destroyed during the floods. So their buffer stock they had is already gone, so they don't have supplies to help rebuild homes because what's on the water is their backup stock. So I guess you start to get into certain commodities, like the article I sent you, Chad, about the quartz, the quartz that's used in the making of semiconductor. One of the big areas where it's made is an area called Spruce Pine, where the quartz is made. That's been
in North Carolina.
Yeah, been devastated. So there's a flow-on effect here, Dan, that I don't think we've fully appreciated how big this is going to be in terms of the impact on the economy. So people have used the word weeks, plural, which to me is not something I'd even thought it would get this far, because I would have thought rational minds would have said, yeah, we'll just get together and make this deal happen. But when you see what's going on Facebook Live from the wharf, from the port, yeah, they're a long way apart and not a lot of interest in talking.
Yeah.
So somebody had told me Friday, I think it was, that the gentleman you were talking about, I guess the head of the striking, he was saying something about, and we're monitoring every ship that's destined for the East Coast ports, and if any steamship line redirects them, we'll know, and just know you're going to pay. Have you guys heard anything on that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So and this is where you wonder what fake news, and you wonder what's right and like what's accurate and what's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad. The storm seems to have played into their hand, right? The union's hand, right? So it gives them a little extra leverage and sense of panic, especially on the East Coast. I don't like to think that, I don't want to project that that's their intention to use that this way, but it certainly has given them some leverage in the negotiations.
And also then you got Montreal, Friday night with 72 hours notice, we're going on strike. The Port
I saw
of Montreal
that.
for minimum of 3 days. I had a conversation with a customer last week on Thursday, and they said, no, we need rates from California OTR over to our DCs, Georgia and all that. We need those rates. And by the way, is there any way, I mean, obviously we can go direct overseas to Savannah, but is there any way we can bring it into Halifax or Montreal?
Right. It's all shaping up.
Yeah. And even Montreal, once they went on strike, because originally we're like, Montreal would be, I mean, it's not a very good port, to be honest with you. It's very congested. There's a lot of construction going on all around the port, which makes dray in and out a nightmare. And it's been going on for ages. Even the construction, and I think it's the La Fontaine Tunnel, it's flooding and it's all sorts of stuff. But it's we said, okay, no problem. But now, even if just those 3 days, it's put it back weeks in Montreal.
So
right,
it'd be a good time to be in the air cargo business, because that's one way that people will get high value, retail season inventory, and especially electronics. But then there becomes, I talked to an air cargo expert this morning who used to work for United, and he said there isn't latent capacity in the air cargo space sitting around waiting to, suddenly run another 4 or 5 legs out of Asia to the US West Coast or East Coast. He said that capacity is just not there. So that's the challenge, Dan, is that I think a lot of people are just stuck with this. I think I'm as this drags on, I'm very concerned about what the impact is on our trucking industry in terms of the survivability for carriers. And I'll use my friend Bobby, who runs out of Sydney, Nova Scotia. He runs a triaxle drop deck, and he brings lumber down. I mean, and for those guys, hurricanes are great news. It's sad to say. It means there's a lot more demand for lumber. Problem is, he normally backhauls with Komatsu wheel loaders out of Baltimore, right? And so with the dock shut, he's got nothing to go back on his specialized equipment. And I think there's hundreds of carriers like that, especially the guys that come from the northern part of the country with lumber. But we're going to desperately need lumber to help rebuild. But there's going to be this sort of chronic imbalance of freight that drives up the cost for everybody.
There's a lot of implications, because in that case, it'll eventually put pressure on those lumber rates, freight rates, right? And then he loses his backhaul. So in the short term, he's going to lose some revenue.
Or the customer is going to pay more, which then in turn, the price of the material goes up, and the price of everything which I feel is already jacked up huge, compared to pre-pandemic prices, if you will. I mean, I did the math on the cabana I built before COVID and after COVID, and the math was astronomical. I was like, holy crap. I mean, it used to be a fact where, you can get the steel, joist for your walls and the steel studs, and why don't you just get wood? It's cheaper, and harder to carry, but cheaper and easier to work with. And now it's it's crazy what's going on out there. So with 3 weeks, then, if this happens, for example, are we estimating a 5, 6, 7, 8? I'm sure there's some reports out there about 9 days delay for every week.
Good question. I did see the number. I know I had it in my head last week.
So last week we talked about 6 days for every week.
Yeah. I'll catch up. Yeah, I think Lars Jensen from Vespucci Marine said if it's like a week, that'll take us into Christmas to clear the backlog. If you're talking 2 weeks, that'll take us well into the new year.
Yeah.
You start to get backups, vessel bunching. But what you really start to have then is you start to impact the flow of empties back to Asia for the pre-Chinese New Year push, right? So we've already seen the empty imbalance caused by the extra transit to avoid the Red Sea crises. That has already contributed to a dislocation of the flow of empties. So, just for context, for every 4 loaded boxes that come into the West Coast, 3 go back to Asia empty. And on the East Coast, it's every 2 for every 2 loaded, 1 goes back empty. So you need a constant flow of vessels coming in and out. And if you end up with some sort of a vessel bunching scenario, you disrupt the ability of vessels to take a whole load of empties back to Asia, which they do when they do the sweep. You know, they have sweeper vessels that go through and pick up empties at a bunch of ports. So when you start to disrupt that, just like we had was Ningbo shut down last week because of a typhoon. So when you start to have events like that, shortage of containers, then you start to disrupt the flow of imports back this direction here. So that's why I think they talk about a longer delay. You start to have a significant amount of vessels bunching up vis-a-vis what we saw off the West Coast in November of 2021, where we had 114 literally parked out around within 50 miles of the port. So that sort of scenario starts to mount up. But I think it's crippling for the auto industry and a number of other industries, like I'm thinking food and wine out of Europe, auto parts in particular. So here we are at the start of RFP season, Chad, and like now carriers are thinking where are rates going to be, and where shippers are thinking where should we, you know, what bids should we accept, and then now we've got all this turmoil again.
That is a big unknown. This is the busy season when shippers are sending their RFPs out to get rates and get bids back. Normally it takes them 3 to 5 months to work through that process, to analyze those bids and make the awards, and then start to execute on those awards. Usually around February, March, April, we see a spike in new rates in our data. So yeah, it really adds an X factor into that calculation. So understanding what the market's doing, I kind of visualize what's happening here as a whiplash effect, right? We're going to have this extreme slowdown from volume coming in and exports going out, and then at some point it's going to, and that might reduce some trucking supply, and then at some point all that volume is going to rush back. Could be the tipping point that the trucking industry has been waiting on. We'll see.
If you're thinking about what would the trigger be for capacity to exit, take out a couple of weeks of revenue if you're a dray operator, that becomes an unsurvivable event.
Right.
Instead of being on the edge.
And then you've also got the flip side of that, where a couple of companies now, 4 that I've spoken to, have said, we got DCs that have enough material and we're moving it from those DCs. So now all of a sudden these companies, like one of them is $5,600 US a load. Wasn't in that budget a week ago. You know, and now so they're saying, well, we got this warehouse over here and we can bring product in and have it offloaded should there be no West Coast disruptions. But now we got to de-stuff it, which is a big issue still on the West Coast, because they're still not getting things out as fast as possible. De-stuff it, get it into a truck and get it to the East Coast. Right. So it's you know what, it is totally reminding me of exactly what we did during COVID, when the West Coast had 140 tankers off the coast. We brought everything to the East Coast and we trucked it and we railed it. And it was like, because I see this as, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but how long, if you're dealing with big box stores or any of this stuff, how long are they going to say, okay, great, before they say we're going to go somewhere else and get that same product? Right. You got to think about it. It's like, you know, I think most people now realize if they sell their product on Amazon, as soon as Amazon realizes this is a great product, they start making it, and they like almost overnight put you out of business. Right. So, you know, the Walmarts of the world, and if anyone's from Walmart, please, we'd love to hear from you in the comments, but the Walmarts of the world, they're not going to wait too long for this. Okay, we'll find another supplier. You know, you're in breach. I mean, I remember when we were doing those bed sheets, it was going to, what's the pharmacy?
Walgreens, CVS.
CVS pharmacy. Yeah. All of them were going to CVS, and they said, here's the deadline. If it's not in by this deadline, the PO's canceled. Forget about it. We don't want it. So that was the mad rush, because we have a certain amount of time. That's why we brought it over to, we actually brought it right to Savannah. And then when it got to Savannah, we didn't even have time to rail it. We had to truck it with team drivers to get into South Florida, or else we're going to miss the PO cutoff. Right. And CVS was like, no, I get it. I understand. But we need to still operate. You guys need to do something. This is our contract. This is what we want. We want X amount of sheets. Now, I don't know if there's, you know, I know the airlines, because we had a big event just before COVID. And I had people coming in from like Australia, or sorry, New Zealand. Sorry, I apologize, Dean.
Oof.
I know. Dean just got mad at me. Did you see that, Chad? As soon as I said it too, I was like, oh, and probably every Kiwi out there is yelling at me right now too. Yeah. But it was, we had people coming in from New Zealand. We had people coming in from North Carolina. And when COVID hit, everything shut down. I was like, okay, I want my money back. They're like, oh, no, we're not giving you your money back. So I'm wondering how many people are going to miss POs, and are those customers really going to be courteous to them, for lack of a better term?
Yeah.
So guys, I've just been looking at some rates, 3-day rates. 3-day rates have still got weekend in it. So 7-day rates on a lot of these lanes like Savannah to Lakeland, to where Chad lives, average for the last couple of months has been 302 up to 354 already. Savannah, Lakeland, moving stuff. So
what do you got from the West Coast to like Savannah and the West Coast to like Illinois?
Yeah, I'm just looking at Chicago. It's up about 16 cents a mile already. So I'm seeing Ontario to Chicago's 3-day rates are up. 3-day rates are up 37 cents. 7-day rates up 18 cents. So actually, no, it's back down to Ontario to Chicago is sort of up already. It's high as 212. So there's freight moving at a much higher rate. So on those lanes, Phoenix is the other one. I learned today that Phoenix is sort of becoming the semiconductor chip hub of the country. Some of the largest semiconductor chips. And the guy that was there that does drayage, he said just there's so much imports that go direct to Phoenix, which is pretty much, Dan, what you and I have been talking about. Those rates are kind of flat at the moment, so no real movement there. So yes, something to watch is the long haul rates off the West Coast to see if that moves.
Yeah, LA's been tight for a while. I've on the shipper side of rates, I've been seeing California rates have been increasing. I think first year-over-year contract increase that I've picked up on it was out of California. So if some of these imports start to shift over to the West Coast, it can really put some pressure over there.
Yeah.
And I know quite a few carriers from Canada anyways that no longer do West Coast.
Yeah.
Because it was a pain in the arse. It was hard. And I mean, getting LTL, especially large LTL out of there for Canadian carriers is really difficult now. Hazmat, you're almost never going to make it.
Yeah.
And now it's going to put an influx over there. It's going to be really interesting, interesting.
On the semiconductor chip piece, remember what you and I talked about on the show a while ago, and we said that it's going to be increasingly harder for people to do business in California. Trucking companies are going to want to avoid it. And I even went as far as saying I could see a proliferation of warehouses on the outskirts of California on the I-10, the I-15, and the I-80. Well, this guy today stood up there and said, we've seen this massive development of semiconductor warehouses, manufacturing facilities in Reno, Las Vegas, and Phoenix. I thought, right.
You're prophetic.
So it's like the point, like what it's doing though, is it's turning Phoenix into more of a head haul or more of a balanced market instead of a net backhaul market. The same with Sparks, Nevada, and the same with Las Vegas. So that, California's regulatory environment and the cost of doing business there and people not wanting to go there has changed the whole dynamics of the West Coast freight market for carriers, because essentially now a lot of your California carriers will be regional carriers that are domiciled there with new equipment that's sort of CARB compliant. Then you'll have the rest of the country sort of running towards California but stopping just short.
Right.
Yeah, and largest exporter of nuts, cashews, almonds, all that kind of stuff. I mean, everyone eats them.
Yeah.
It's almost going to turn into like a pool distribution.
Yeah.
Right. Where a carrier runs around California, grabs all the LTL, comes out and just parks outside, goes into Nevada for the south, goes up north. And then there's going to be massive distribution centers there that just people come in for full loads all day long.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to, I really do think eventually it will turn into a pool as opposed to a hub and spoke kind of scenario. We'll see how it's going to work.
Sad part
so Chad, if somebody's sorry, Dean, go.
Well, the sad part is there's not one decent sounding truck in California anymore. They're all these emission, quiet, engine choke.
Oh, you bring Grumpy Pete through California, buddy. You're gonna be yelled at left, right, and center by people hugging trees and wearing Birkenstocks. It's gonna be crazy.
They literally won't let you across the border. They've got all the inspection places where they don't let anyone in that's got an old banger like I've got.
Wow.
But those are the classics, man. That's what makes trucking.
Yeah.
But Chad, let me ask you this, because I think before we leave today, in your professional opinion, somebody's got a bid coming in, got East Coast, West Coast trucks, like rail, ocean. What is their position now? Like, because I mean, obviously, you go to the Maersk, you go to the MSCs. I mean, we've seen reports of $3,000 increase in container rates once the strike's over and once the backlog's cleared. Call it mid-January, end of January, beginning of February, just when the RFP is actually kicking off. Because if you have new people, you're integrating them in. What is the best route for people these days?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think signaling to senior management the level of risk that's out there in that scenario is probably really key. We've got a lot of risk on these rates. We've been seeing ocean rates coming down since July. They've been trending down a good bit, but this will probably spike it up as it takes up a lot of the capacity. We're seeing a lot of shippers moving to nearshoring, bringing freight into Mexico and then bringing it over the border, across the border, intermodal and truckload. We're seeing more and more demand for those rates from some of the products that we offer. So yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of uncertainty out there right now with what's going on.
So if you were in sales and somebody came to you with an RFP right now, would you offer up those scenarios and say, well, why don't we price this like 2 or 3 ways to give us some options? Or even if you're pricing, call it on like a nearshoring experience where you're saying, okay, we're going to bring it into Mexico, we're going to truck it up, here's going to be your all-in rate. I'm assuming as more and more people start doing that, those rates are going to go up because of supply and demand as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think offering multiple solutions like you laid out is really wise, and just being transparent with their customers and making sure that they're on the same page of what the different scenarios are that could play out and how the rates will move. Yeah.
And Dean, I don't know if you remember, but back in January, when we talked about 2024, I said, I do believe 2024 is the year of transparency and the year of cost plus. And you think about if anyone that followed that advice, where they'd be right now. Because now is when people are going to start taking advantage of the market, right? Like, come on, we got to call it like it is, right? Shippers are taking advantage of the market. Prior to this, they've been taking advantage. You talk to any carrier, they feel they're being taken advantage of. If you have the freight, you have the power. And no offense to any shipper out there, but now it's like, ooh, it's my turn. And as much as we've always said, you got to leave something on the table for somebody else. I think more than ever now, here's the playbook.
Yeah.
Here's what it is. Here's everything, A to Z. I will give you the invoices. I need 15 points to have my company survive. Well, let's negotiate because I'm paying 20% more. So maybe can we do 10 points until it switches and then we'll give you 17. Like this is where the back and forth comes in. And this is where I believe RFPs are going to leave so many people out in the cold. And Chad, I mean, Dean and I have talked about this so many times, right? The cost to put out an RFP for companies is astronomical, right? And then you have the rejection rate that goes up when rates start rising because nobody wants to do the freight that they agreed to do when the price, when the market was down. And I don't know, part of me says it's maybe, we talked about automation and all these new things in logistics. Maybe it's time to put out an RFP and say, give me your costs. We're offering 15 points. Let's go.
There is some of that goes on in the spot space. I think with a lot of the enterprise size shippers that we work with, most of their freight, the vast majority of it, around 80%, is drop trailer recurring lanes, right? And so they're going to get a very competitive bid process with the larger asset based players on that 80% of freight. And then they start to segment out that more variable freight, those short-term lanes, seasonal lanes, spot lanes, into different categories. One can be index-based pricing, and that's where they say, hey, we're going to have this lane. It's going to run at some point in the next 3 months for about a week or two. Let's agree now that you'll supply the capacity. and we'll pay you rate view rate plus X. And so that's index-based pricing. We're seeing that pick up more and more. And then there's API live pricing that's picking up more and more, where the shippers are sending out that API blast as like a little mini bid and getting rates back immediately and making awards based on thresholds, based on perhaps the rate view rate. If it's within 10%, award it. That's saving the shippers a ton of time in the bid process and on that spot freight. They're not having to monitor their internal TMS load board and make those awards and negotiations and that sort of thing. And then there's that load board, right? And you know, they're subject to the market. They have, you know, where I came from, we had 50 logistics coordinators on the floor monitoring those load boards, working those loads, making those awards. So I think strategy to segment the freight types that a shipper is procuring is really key. Yeah.